I couldn't believe my eyes. There, in the dimly lit parking lot, Elvis Presley, the king himself, was getting out of a car with a big, shiny Colt .45 in his hand. He was trying to walk it into the White House like it was a birthday present for President Nixon. I almost choked on my coffee. "Elvis," I yelled, jumping out of the car. "Are you out of your mind? You can't just waltz into the White House with a gun." Elvis looked at me, all chagrin. "It's not loaded, you know, killer. I paid $2,000 for it. It's an antique. Look at the stock, hand-carved. I had to keep my cool." "I know it's not loaded, but the Secret Service isn't going to care about that. They'll think you're trying to start World War II. Look, just let me handle this, okay?" Elvis nodded, but I could tell he was still itching to show off his new toy. "I'd like to give it to President Nixon myself," he said, almost whining. "Trust me, Elvis. Just do what I say. I'll talk to the guard." We got out of the car, and I saw the guard at the White House gate eyeing us suspiciously. I walked up to him, trying to act like I knew what I was doing. "Sir, my friend here has a gift for the president. It's an antique pistol. How would you like to handle this?" The guard gave me a once-over, then glanced at Elvis. "I'll need to see the pistol, sir." Elvis handed over the gun, and the guard gave it a quick inspection. "We'll take it from here, thank you." Elvis looked disappointed but nodded. "Thanks, man." We waited by the car, and after a few minutes an aide came out and motioned for us to follow him. I glanced at Elvis, who was bouncing on his toes, clearly excited. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I knew it was going to be wild. Inside, the White House was even more impressive than I'd imagined. We were led to the Oval Office, and there, standing with a big smile, was President Nixon. He shook our hands, and Elvis was practically beaming. "Mr. President, this is my old pal, Orson Killer," Elvis said, introducing me. President Nixon shook my hand and said, "I've had a good talk with Mr. Presley here. I admire his work and his support of our war on drugs. I'd like to present him with a pair of presidential cufflinks as a token of my appreciation." Elvis was blown away. He looked at me, and I could see the pride in his eyes. President Nixon then turned to me and handed me a beautiful brooch. "And this is for your wife, Mr. Killer," he said. "She must be a beautiful lady." Elvis chimed in, "She is, Mr. President. The most beautiful girl I've ever seen." I thanked the president, and he turned to his assistant. "Bud, can you see any reason why we can't get Mr. Presley a bandity badge?" Bud Krogh hesitated. "Well, there are some rules, but I can't think of any reason we can't make it happen." President Nixon nodded. "Good, we'll find a way through federal rules, won't we, Bud?" Elvis was grinning from ear to ear. The president shook our hands again, and we were escorted out for a tour of the White House. As we walked through the halls, I couldn't stop thinking about the crazy day it had been. Elvis, the White House, and a Colt .45. It was like something out of a movie. But it was real, and I was right in the middle of it. We were about to leave when Elvis turned to me and said, "You know, Orson, I've got a feeling this is just the beginning. I've got some big plans, and I want you to be a part of them." I looked at him, wondering what he had in mind. But one thing was for sure, with Elvis anything was possible, and I was ready for whatever came next. I stepped off the plane in Honolulu, and the crowd was just as the colonel predicted. I'd flown in before, but usually on vacation, and I managed to keep a low profile. This time was different. The colonel had planned this like it was a big Vegas opening. He wanted to make history with the first live satellite broadcast of a musical event to the whole world. I was a little tired, having lost some weight, and the colonel's people said I needed to lose more. But I was still the king, and I had to look the part. I had my guys with me, including my stepbrother David, who I'd asked to help manage the crowd. I told him it was like how the Queen of England does its security first, then the Queen. If it was good enough for the Queen, it was good enough for the King. The press was all over me. They wrote that I looked tired but still beautiful. They mentioned that Priscilla and Lisa Marie were expected to be in town for the concert, but my friend Linda Thompson wasn't. Things were complicated with Priscilla and me. We had filed for divorce, but we still saw each other, just not at Graceland. Hawaii was all work for Elvis Inc. Joan Deary, our coordinator, had been there for a week to make sure everything was perfect. We had 3 rehearsals, and I worked with some great musicians like James Burton and John Wilkinson. My old friends from the Mafia, like Charlie Hodge on guitar and Jerry Sheff on bass, were there too. We had a full band and a great audience of 6,000 people at the dress rehearsals. The Colonel was nervous but confident. I was in a good mood, and when I sang, it was like I was pouring my heart out. The audience was entranced. After the rehearsals, I wanted my friends around me. I spent some time with Lisa Marie, and Priscilla and I exchanged polite greetings. I had dinner with the guys and listened to some new music. I was always curious about what other artists were doing. Later, I did some karate exercises with my instructor, Kong Ri. He reminded me that I was the amateur, but I still liked to challenge him. The concert was a huge success. The Colonel scheduled a news conference the next day, and he announced that over 1 billion people had watched the broadcast. He said the proceeds from the live audience would go to the Honolulu Cancer Society. He also mentioned that we were heading to Las Vegas next. When someone asked if Priscilla would be joining us, the Colonel tried to dodge the question, saying they were just having some disagreements and that they loved each other. I slept for almost a whole day after the concert. When I finally woke up, I called for my friends to come over. We celebrated, and I called Linda to tell her about the success. I also called Orson, my friend from back home, to ask how the reception was in Los Angeles. He lied and said it was sensational, but I didn't notice. After the celebration, I went back to my routine, but things were changing. I was feeling the pressure, and the crowd, the music, and the fame were taking their toll. But I was the king, and I had to keep going. I plopped down on the couch, holding a stack of papers. I had been working on these numbers for hours, trying to get everything just right. Susan walked in, a cup of coffee in her hand, and I waved her over. "Hey, look at this. I've been working on it for the past few months. It's our new business plan." Susan sat down next to me, took a sip of her coffee, and peered at the papers. "Business plan? What kind of business?" I pointed to the columns of figures. "Remember when I told you about the idea I had? The private company? Well, I've been working on the numbers. I've got a good feeling about it." Susan looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "I'm not so good with these things, you know that." I nodded, understanding. "It's okay. I'll explain it to you. See, here we have the overhead costs. That's the money we need to keep the lights on, pay rent, and all that. Then there's the salary for Ferdy Gonzalez. He's going to be our main guy, and he's taking a big risk by joining us. So I'm giving him a bit of the company too. That's why his salary is only around $11,000 for the year. It's a lot less than he could make elsewhere, but he believes in this as much as I do." Susan nodded, still looking at the numbers. "So, you're saying he's going to be a stockholder. That's a big deal, right?" "Yeah, it is. It means he's not just working for a paycheck. He's invested in the success of the company. If we do well, he does well. And if we don't, well, we're all in it together." I could see her thinking it over. "And what about you? What's your salary?" I smiled. "I'm not taking a salary right now. Not until we're making a profit. I'm putting everything I can back into the business. It's a risk, but I think it's worth it." Susan put her coffee down and turned to face me. "You've been through a lot, Orson. I just want to make sure you're not setting yourself up for another fall. You know, with everything that happened with the job and the other stuff." I reached out and took her hand. "I know, honey, but this is different. This is something I'm passionate about, and it's not just about the money. It's about doing something meaningful, something that can make a difference." Susan squeezed my hand. "I believe in you, Orson. I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself too. You've come a long way since we were in Mexico. You're not the same person you were, and I'm proud of you." I felt a warm rush of gratitude. "Thanks, Susan, that means a lot. I promise I'll take care of myself, but I think this is the right move. I can feel it." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. "I'm here for you, no matter what. Now, let's go get Carlita from school. She's probably waiting for us." I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose. "Yeah, let's go, and thanks for listening." We stood up, and I tucked the papers back into the folder. As we walked out the door, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. But I knew with Susan by my side, I could face whatever came next. I had a plan in place for Ferdy. He'd start with 10% of the company stock, but only if he was still working at Cybercom by January 1976. After that, he'd get 10% equity, and a cut of any increase in profits. I had the right to let him go if we were in the red. but if we were making money, he'd get a fair severance package. Susan asked me how many subscriptions Ferdy was supposed to bring in right away. I told her I was aiming for 2.5% of UCLA graduating class of 1975. She thought it was a small number, but I explained it would be around 15 people from a class of 600. I had bigger plans, though. In 3 months, I hope to increase that to 5% with a targeted mailing. Ferdy had a great writing style, and I planned to use it to our advantage. I knew a lot of people in the tech industry, and I had a knack for getting them to share their stories. I was going to make our newsletter the go-to source for everyone in the field. Susan wanted to take a picture of Carla and me, jokingly calling it Carla and Daddy before Daddy became rich. Carla was too busy watching Wild Kingdom to come over, so Susan and I decided to use the 20 minutes to do something more fun. We laughed and kissed, then went to our room. Ferdy and I agreed on the terms of our partnership. With the first issue of our report just 10 weeks away, we needed a top-notch secretary and proofreader. I knew just the person, Gladys Schmidt. She had worked with me at Hewlett-Packard, where she had the challenging job of transcribing the technical notes from the engineers. I hadn't known she had a drinking problem until I ran into her at an AA meeting. I asked her if she wanted to join Cybercom, and she said yes. She was eager to leave her freelance work behind. I decided to visit Tom Bayliss, my old boss at Hewlett-Packard. I was worried he might offer me my old job back, but I reassured him that I had my own plan. I told him about hiring Gladys, and explained that I wasn't poaching. He wished me luck and reminded me to install a security camera, which I didn't do. We set up a special room in the office for our files. We kept it secure, no phone calls or visitors allowed. From there, we produced our lively, 16-page weekly newsletter. We broke the news about Texas Instruments' plans for their 16-bit microprocessors, and when subscribers called for more details, we kept quiet, not revealing our sources. The year-end financials were in, and we had 38,000 subscribers. We were finally in the black. Susan was excited, but she only let me have 1 beer to celebrate. I told her I'd earn more if we stayed profitable. One morning, the phone rang at 7. It was Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager. He said Elvis was really sick, and he wanted to meet me. I called Charlie to get some background on the Colonel. He told me about the Colonel's past as a dog catcher and circus promoter, and how he had been given the title of Colonel as a joke. He also warned me that Elvis had been hospitalized for drug detox, and that the Colonel was working him too hard. I met the Colonel at his office near the RCA studios. He was a big guy, clean-shaven, with a string tie and a light brown suit. He offered me a drink and gave me a pre-release acetate of Elvis's new album. He got straight to the point. Elvis was overdosing on drugs, and he wanted me to help because I had been a drug addict too, and was one of Elvis's closest friends. I told the Colonel I would try, but I didn't expect much success. I hadn't seen Elvis in a while, but we talked often. The Colonel knew about every call, and he explained that he kept detailed records of everything Elvis did, from McDonald's orders to Cadillac giveaways. He told me about the time Elvis bought 14 Cadillacs in one afternoon, giving one to a bank teller who had been nice to his manager. I asked if the Cadillac giveaway was a sign of Elvis's health issues, and the Colonel exploded, saying it was a huge problem. I pushed back, asking if it was worse than the Colonel's gambling. He calmed down and said he didn't take drugs or have public meltdowns. I agreed to try to help Elvis and suggested visiting Graceland when he was in Memphis for a few weeks. The Colonel offered to pay for my trip, and I said I'd talk to Elvis and set a date. I left the Colonel's office feeling a mix of concern and determination. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. I walked through the busy lobby of the Hilton. It was 8 o'clock, and the place was a flurry of activity. The slot machines were going wild, their arms pulling down and up, in search of the big win. They made a constant whirring sound, sometimes interrupted by excited yells. A woman near the concierge leapt up from her stool, shouting to her friend, "Aaron, look, look." She turned to the next gambler. "Come here, look." She saw me walking toward the front desk. "Mr. Come Look." I smiled and congratulated her, then headed to the concierge. "I'm here to see Mr. Presley," I said. The clerk looked up, his face tired. He hid his half-eaten sandwich under the counter. Mr. Presley is not staying here, he said. Yes, he is. Please tell him Mr. Killer is here for his appointment. Killere. He's not here, sir. Please call the manager, I insisted. A man with pince-nez appeared from behind the partition. He looked at me, paused, then motioned for me to follow him to an inner office. I understand all these precautions, Mr. Cohn. Please ring up to his suite. Ask for Mr. Stanley or Mr. Esposito or Mr. West or Mr. Hodge. Tell them Orson is here. Mr. Presley is expecting me. Please wait a minute, sir. He was back after a moment. I will escort you up. The elevator to the 9th floor needed a special key. A plainclothes policeman was on duty outside. The manager motioned to him. This is Mr. Killer. Yes, he's expected. This way. I followed the manager down the hall to the Eisenhower suite. The officer knocked, and David Stanley opened the door. Hey there, Orson. How you doing? Good, thanks. I turned to the manager. Thanks very much. David led me to the far end of the suite. The lights of Las Vegas blared into the penthouse. He opened the door, and there was Elvis, practicing karate moves. Hey there, Killer. Come in. David, get Orson a drink. What are you? Killing yourself with these days, Killer. I laughed. A beer would be fine. Make that 6 beers, that's what the boys up here always order. Lamar would faint if I ordered up only 1 beer for him. We sat down in opposite armchairs. I looked at Elvis, sad to see the bloat on what had once been a perfectly shaped young man. His face, once like a Greek god's, was different now. Killer, I know about your bad luck, but we won't talk about that. That's over. I had to say something about the nightclub performance. That was tough luck last night, but you got through it just fine. Those things happen. Susan was so happy to take it all in, and so was Carla. She became best friends with Lisa Marie. Did you hear what Lisa did on the way out? No. Elvis was eager to know. Well, there was a noisy fan of yours at the next table, a teenager. Lisa couldn't stand for her not to know that Lisa was Lisa Presley, but she was too timid to tell her herself, so she asked my Carlita to tell her. Elvis laughed, his face lighting up. That's my girl, she's got spirit. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night before hanging between us. Finally, I took a deep breath. Elvis, we need to talk about something important. He looked at me, his eyes serious. What is it, Killer? I hesitated, knowing this wouldn't be easy. Elvis, I've been worried about you. You know, with everything that's been going on. I think you need to get some help. Elvis's face darkened. What do you mean, help? I mean, with the pills. They're getting the better of you, and you know it. Last night was a wake-up call. Elvis looked away, his jaw tightening. I'm fine, Killer. I just need to rest. I leaned forward. Elvis, you're not fine. You're a brilliant performer, but you're losing yourself. We all care about you, and we want you to be okay. Please let us help you. He was quiet for a long time, the tension in the room thick. Finally, he let out a long sigh. I know, Killer, I know, but it's not easy. It's hard to admit. I nodded, understanding the struggle. I know it's hard, but you're not alone. We're here for you, and you can get through this. You're stronger than you think. Elvis looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. Thank you, Killer. I'll think about it. I'll talk to the guys, see what they think. I smiled, relieved. That's all I ask. We're here for you no matter what. We talked for a while longer, the tension easing. Elvis shared some of his plans for the future, and I listened, hoping he would take the first step toward getting the help he needed. As I left, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time it would be different. I watched Elvis beam with pride. She's a beautiful little girl. I'm sure y'all feel that way about your girl. Gee, it's great, isn't it, to have a little girl. Wish they could just stay frozen at that age. He looked to one side. On the other hand, I guess we all wish we could stay frozen back then. But you've been through a little pain. I heard about it. Booze will kill you. It wasn't booze, the other stuff too. Actually, Elvis, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, just to tell you something about what happened to me. Cocaine, yes, bad stuff. I would never take that stuff myself, though, you know, looks like everybody else does, looks like. You know John Lennon, of course. No, I don't, Elvis. Well, you know Mick Jagger. I don't, Elvis, I only know you. Elvis like that. Only know you? That would make a great song. Let's see, only know you. Beautiful you. You only know me. Tam-tam you. Heavenly turn do. No, that's not very good. You want me to try it on the guitar. Elvis, let me just say it. I worry about you." "I like that. My mom used to say she worried about me." "You didn't know Mom. My real mom, Gladys." "No, but I know about her." "But of course you know my dad, Vernon." "Of course, everybody knows Vernon." "I'll tell you something really sad, Killer. My dad is not doing so well suddenly with Dee. Dee is David's mother, and Rick's mother too. I never quite understand it, and even if Vernon is like my older brother, he's still my dad, and so he doesn't tell me things that would make me sad." Orson lost patience. "Do you tell your dad things that would make him sad?" Elvis looked up, his eyelids lowered, the inquisitive grin on his face. "Then, not that. Don't go there. Killer, you're not going to give me a lecture about Dr. Nick's pills, are you? If you kept my hours, you'd understand I got to have some help keeping those hours." "Elvis, you're poisoning yourself. There isn't any point in your saying what kind of relief the pills do. Not if those same pills are pulling you down in the long run." "In the long run? Killer, we got to live in the short run. I mean, I got to perform like tomorrow night, like last night, like night after tomorrow. So who's gonna tell me I can't get a certified medical doctor to tell me how to live with that schedule?" Certified medical doctor. A certified medical doctor I'd listen to was somebody who loves you a lot. That doctor wouldn't let you take stuff that makes you older and endangers your health. Elvis stood up. He had a second's trouble in balancing his frame. "Fuck this fucking business, this telling me what I can do and what I cannot do. Who invited you to be my doctor? I mean, can't I run my own life?" He turned to the fireplace. Orson got up. "I had to try, Elvis." He heard nothing from Elvis, who had turned his back. Orson started to walk to the door. He stopped, arrested by the sound of convulsive sobs. He looked around. Elvis turned, walked over to Orson, and threw his arms around him, his shoulders heaving. "Now go, Killer," he said hoarsely. "Go and thanks anyway." Orson returned the embrace, opened the door quietly, and closed it behind him. David was playing cards, still serving as gatekeeper. Orson nodded curtly, turning his head to one side to hide his tears. "See you," he managed, and walked to the elevator. It would be the third tour of the year, starting in Oklahoma City. Elvis didn't complain. He was quickly back into his routine since resuming his concert life. My day began as usual at 4 in the afternoon. David, who had joined the Mafia 2 years ago, usually had to nudge me awake. I liked to eat as soon as I got up and would have my regular breakfast. 2 cheese omelets, 1 pound of bacon very, very crisp, a cantaloupe, and black coffee. I'd watch TV while eating, especially quiz shows. I'd challenge the guys to compete with me on the right answer to the puzzle on the screen. "Joe, I say the answer's DiMaggio. That's a buck I'm betting, $1. Shit, it's Mickey Mantle. I owe you." I reached over and lowered the volume. "I owe you $1, Joe." "Joe's not here," David said. "Well, tell him when he gets back I owe him $1. At 8, I walked into my bedroom. The wrecking crew assembled, 5 men led by Al Strada, the wardrobe manager. I took my time selecting that night's outfit. "Let's go with Mad Tiger. Don't be afraid of the tiger, boys," I teased. Pussy, come on over to Elvis. You've been lonely a long time." I began to hum. The tiger jumpsuit was taken out of the huge closet. The whole wardrobe would be moved to the hotel at Terre Haute for the next concert. I liked to choose from the entire inventory every night. When dressed, I drew in my breath and looked at myself in the mirror. The guys around me chatted a bit. Red talked about how well I had done the night before. "It's a great act," Charlie agreed. At 8:30 exactly, we walked to the elevator. There'd be police escorts waiting in the lobby, and my crew made sure I got down on schedule. In the elevator, I suddenly pushed the emergency stop button. An alarm began to sound. The elevator froze. "David, go back to the suite. I forgot to bring my drug enforcement badge to show the troops that'll be escorting us to the party." "Well, yes, Elvis, but you got to move this elevator on down before I can get out and go back up." "Oh yeah, sure." I pushed the garage floor button, and the alarm stopped ringing. Arrived at the basement level, David scooted out and signaled for the adjacent elevator. He entered it and went back up to the 8th floor. "We'll wait here for David to get back with the badge. Then we'll go on to the main floor," I commented. Joe looked at his watch. "Nervous in the service, Red. We used to say that in the army, nervous in the service." "I know, Elvis. I was in the army with you, remember?" Yeah, I remember. I remember, too, you were with us in Paris. That was one hell of a trip. I'm sure Orson thought so, too. Yeah, Orson lost his cherry on that one. He was a nice kid back then. I sometimes wondered, did he tell Priscilla what happened when he got back to Germany? I think maybe he didn't tell her, maybe didn't tell anyone. What the hell's the matter with David? Get lost having to go all the way from garage to floor 8 back to garage. The elevator door opened. David was there with the badge. I grabbed it and walked into the elevator, followed by my team. On the main floor, everyone was waiting for us. Tonight, it was 12 city policemen and my 5 personal bodyguards. The limousines were outside, engines on. I climbed into the first one. The motorcycle policemen ahead were given the signal, and the caravan moved out. I walked into my dressing room at the Myriad Convention Center at 8:48. I could hear the applause for J.D. Sumner, the warm-up singer. J.D. was helped out by the Stamps, a 5-man white male backup group, and Kathy Westmoreland, a white singer who led the Sweet Inspirations, black women who made their name backing up Aretha Franklin. The two groups were blending white gospel and black soul. At 9 exactly, I walked on stage, flourishing a red scarf. I angled my head slightly to shield my burgeoning neck, and the lights frayed over my torso, focusing brightly on my resolute smile and the motion of my hands. The crowd erupted, and I swung into C.C. Ryder. At 9:58, I finished with my final song, I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. My bodyguards went quickly into action. They distrusted stages that didn't rise high enough off floor level. When the elevation was a mere 3 or 4 feet, aggressive fans sometimes hurled themselves up onto the stage, necessitating quick protective action by my human cordon. Tonight, the designated forward guards were David Stanley and brother Ricky. Backing them up was Ed Parker, my karate coach, and Jerry Schilling, my film editor and personnel manager since 1964. Red West and his cousin Sonny were there, too, for protection. I was well shielded, and Oklahoma City was easy. The stage there rose 8 feet above the floor. Once again, the lead limousine, the motorcycle cops, and the 2 trailing limousines. The caravan proceeded straight to the airport, right up to the Lisa Marie's gangway. Boarding the plane, I headed aft to my bedroom, and the $14,000 queen-size bed. Dr. Nick was there, and the crew had to put off disrobing until the doc pulled out Quaaludes, Percotton, and Dilaudid to help me decompress from my concert high. Then they wiggled me out of my costume, put on pajamas and a robe. Food was waiting in the bedroom, and I began to eat alone. The flight to Terre Haute was just over 2 hours. Once we landed, the limousines and police drove us to the hotel and up to the suite. Colonel Parker was there with the advance men who had checked things out. The window of the suite was blackened, and keys were in place in all the doors. The colonel and the advance men left to fly to Cleveland, the next stop, to look in on things. Dr. Nick came in again and ministered to me. I ate the cheeseburgers and ribs and signaled David to bring in Ginger. Lying on the bed next to her, I spent hours reading, including the Bible, Chero's Book of Numbers, Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, and Joseph Berner's The Impersonal Life. At 5, the pills took hold. I slept until awakened at 4 in the afternoon to prepare for that night's concert in Terre Haute. The news hit me hard. Susan told me Elvis was gone. I stood there, stunned, feeling the weight of it all. I managed to gather myself and sit down, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and memories. I thought about all the times we shared, the laughs, the late-night calls, and the whispered promises. Susan booked my flight. She knew I had to be there, to say goodbye to my brother, to the man who was more than just a friend or a stepbrother. I packed my things and tried to prepare myself for what was to come, but nothing could have truly prepared me for the scene that awaited. When I arrived in Memphis, Billy was there to greet me. His face was somber, a stark contrast to the usual smile. We drove to Graceland, and the sight was overwhelming. People from all over the world had gathered, flowers piled high, a sea of faces, all there to pay their respects. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Charlie was waiting for me at Graceland. We talked late into the night, sharing stories and memories, trying to make sense of the loss. Charlie told me about the last times he had seen Elvis, the conversations they had, and how much Elvis had missed me. It was comforting to know that even in his final days, Elvis had thought of me. The funeral was a blur. Priscilla and Lisa Marie were there, both dressed in black, their faces veiled with grief. I stood by Vernon, feeling the weight of the moment. The songs filled the air, the voices of the singers echoing through the room. Kathy Westmoreland, James Blackwood, Jake Hess, and J.D. Sumner, all of them sang the songs that Elvis loved, the songs that had been a part of his life and ours. As I stood there, I couldn't help but think back to the first time I met Elvis, the young man who had taken the world by storm. I remembered the train ride to Paris, the late night calls, and the last conversation we had, where he admitted that he was killing himself. I had hoped it was just words, a moment of weakness, but now it was real. After the service, I found a quiet corner and let the tears flow. I thought about the impact Elvis had on so many lives, the joy he brought, and the legacy he left behind. The songs would live on, a testament to his talent and his spirit. And in my heart, he would always be there, the brother I loved, the friend who was always there, and the idol who had touched the lives of millions. As I boarded the plane to go back home, I realized that even though Elvis was gone, his spirit would never leave us. He was a part of who we were, and his memory would live on in the hearts of those who loved him. And for me, he would always be the brother I called Elvis, the one who made the world a brighter place with his music and his smile.